Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, I think we should add like in a overly complicated world.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent tagline to append our little intro there. Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the sunshine if you have it. Happy to be here this week. Lots to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, let's dive right in and just reminding our listeners that we are moving again to two phases instead of three phases to give us a little more depth because there's just so much going on. So,
hmm
I appreciate you all adjusting with Dr. Lisa and I as we move forward here. But, Dr. Lisa, you brought this word of the week to my attention that I had never heard of, but I immediately started thinking about a list of folks that would fit the bill. So, can you explain it to us here?
Yes, I'm actually surprised you hadn't heard of it. I feel like it has been in
Yeah.
several news reports in relation to the Doge crew and other various people who are lovers of posting provocative information on social media. So the word is edgelord. And I heard it and I was like, I wonder what that means. I feel like I should know, but I don't. So I looked it up. Anyway, so it is a term that describes someone, usually with online, right? Which is why there's just like a gazillion edgelords right now. And I think it also tends to focus on men, but it doesn't have to be. And they are these people that deliberately, on purpose, express pretty provocative or extreme opinions intentionally to get a rise out of someone, right? So they are trying to stir up controversy. They are being quote unquote edgy, which is where the edgelord comes from. But it's not edgy in a good way, right? It's often nihilistic. They're often using language that isn't really appropriate. And so they want to be shocking to people. So like I
Yes.
said,
Yes.
Elon Musk is a pretty great example of an edge lord right now who is,
Hmm.
purposefully provoking people online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I saw this word, the first couple people I thought about was Kevin Samuels, who passed, but he was specifically talking about Black women in this way,
Okay.
online
Okay.
specifically. And then another one, Lisa, that just popped up in my mind that we've talked about before on previous podcasts. That's not a man. I was trying to think of someone who was not a man. J.K. Rowling, we've talked about before.
Oh, we have. Yeah.
Maybe that
Yeah.
fits the bill too. I'm still mulling over it, but maybe she fits the bill given the vitriol that she's posted many times before, especially around the trans community. So anyway,
hmm
I'll just leave those there and let people percolate on other edge lords that they can think of and being able to name them, right? Like I think what's really cool is that you brought up this label for folks. So now we can see people for who they are and what they're doing in real time. Real
Yep.
time. So
100%.
yeah,
100%.
yeah. All right, well, let's get into phase one. So, Lisa, of course, I've been trying my best and have been probably failing when it comes to filtering. I mean, using a sieve to really determine what I take in and what I don't take in because it's just so much to take in. And so when it comes to social media, news, et cetera, I try to be just very careful with what I
hmm
take in. And so
hmm
I do have a subscription to The Economist, and this past week, they published an article called The Unbearable Lightness of Being Donald Trump. And what I found very interesting about the article is, like I shared with you, Lisa, usually the title doesn't it doesn't
Right.
match the article. So
Right.
that's the first thing. It doesn't match the article. But what I think is really important and kind of encapsulated in the article, it just talks about how the entire country and most of the world is taking his actions so seriously when it
hmm
seems that he is
hmm
taking them so lightly. That's one thing.
Right.
But then the other piece that I felt was really important for us to think about is this uh, time-sucking energy vampire of sowing chaos
Mm-hmm.
in such a way that it's almost like gosh, what was it? It was a children's story when I was a kid, The Little Boy Who Cried Wolf,
Yeah.
where, you're constantly crying wolf in such a way that creates chaos. But what happens when you really follow through? Well, as the average American, you may or may not take certain things seriously, but because of how volatile he has been in both
Mm-hmm.
terms,
Mm-hmm.
you have to take everything seriously, right?
Yeah.
If not, then we slip into fascism, we slip into all kinds of things. And so given that, it's truly that we have to take everything seriously, resist, and then hope that the tide slows down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that we as resistors, Lisa, have to continue to resist in such a way that we break these cycles of chaos, right?
Okay.
He's the trigger, he's constantly the trigger of the chaos. We know this already. He's the trigger, Doge is the trigger, the oligarchs around him are the triggers. And at the same time, we can't just let them continue to have voice without uh, taking it seriously, right? So Lisa, for example, I can't remember the number of states, but I know there are several states, for example, all of education, K through 12 education in the United States was asked to sign a pledge, an anti-DEI pledge,
Right.
but now we're
Right.
seeing certain states say, bullshit, we're not signing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those types of actions and actors break the chaos to push back to say, absolutely not. We're not going to do this. And then hopefully things recede where order is restored. But look at how much effort it takes to resist over and over and over again. So the order is restored again and again, Lisa. So, I think we are running ourselves ragged in response to a very nonchalant and volatile president. That's what I'm getting out of this Economist article, Lisa. And I don't know how you've been experiencing that chaos sowing, but that seems to be what I'm picking up, and the people that are having courage right now.
Okay, so it's sounds like it's a little different than the quote unquote flood of the zone, right? Which is obviously still happening, but it's uncertainty, it's back and forth, it's left and right, it's kind of trying to keep people on their toes, and um which will, destabilize our capacity to resist, and resisting while feeling unstable creates more energy. So it's a lopsided situation, is what you're saying, that you and I and others and state governors and attorneys general and lawyers and friends, etc., are all just investing a enormous amount of energy. But when we look at the person that's creating the chaos, they're just going golfing. Is that kind of how I'm understanding this? Because I think about the weekend not too long ago where all the markets crashed, right? Because of the stupidity of the tariffs, which, just to be clear, were not reciprocal. They were much, much higher. And what was he doing? He went to play golf for the weekend and schmooze with folks from Saudi Arabia, because I think they were running the tournament, while
Exactly.
everyone
Exactly.
else's retirement was getting flushed down the toilet. So
Exactly.
is
Yep.
that,
Yep.
so that's the kind of like his lightness, his like, whatever, I'm just going to throw a bomb and then I'm just going to turn around and, eat a hamburger or something. And then everyone else is expending all of this physical and emotional energy in response to it. Okay.
Well, exactly. And, I think what's interesting is having the privilege to do that, having the privilege to
Mm-hmm.
do that,
Mm-hmm.
the privilege to, I remember, for example, I forget what podcast I was listening to, but I believe it was, I think it was Shannon Sharp. Shannon Sharp, retired NFL player, Hall of Famer. And he said, and I'm giving no context to this statement, y'all, but just give me a little bit here, where he said, you know, I have the privilege of, frankly, voting for the majority of y'all. The average person that's not a millionaire, that's not a billionaire, that has no, name, notoriety, or recognition at all. I'm voting for folks in such a way that I'm hoping that they have the chance at a great life. The problems that he has as a millionaire, as a Hall of Famer, as an African American male that is affluent in this country are quite different from another African American male or any other community in this country. And so knowing that there are folks that, yes, some of this applies to them, but much of it does not. I think that's where the salience is now starting to settle in for people who thought that such vitriol and chaos being sown would never apply to them.
Well, and I also I think I agree with you. There's definitely a good number of people that would just like, and if it does happen, it's not going to apply to me. But I also think there are a significant number of people who just didn't believe him. Going back to your earlier point, right?
Yes.
They were just like, no, we don't take him literally, right, or seriously. He's just like saying stuff. He doesn't mean it. It's just to get. He's being an edgelord. He's just trying to get a rise out of the libs, right? And so I do think there's a not insignificant number of people who are a little horrified that he's actually doing the things that he said he was going to do, which is kind of amusing to me because I'm like,
yes.
He told you, and there was Project 2025. So, but I do get, I can understand how you can talk yourself into a situation where you're like, oh, this is just his personality. He just speaks big, but won't actually do any of that. And then I think that is a distinct group from the people who are like, sure, he might be serious, he might not, but ultimately I don't care if he is because it won't impact me. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you have these, so we're parsing out various levels of seriousness when it comes to, or not even seriousness, maybe literal or non-literal believers. Like you have a group like Lisa, you and I are probably in this group where it's like, nope, not only do we believe he's going to do it, it's not going to surprise us when he does. We are believers that he will do what he said he would do, which is why we voted the way we did and we responded the way we responded. So you got some very literal people that are like, nope, I'm not putting anything past him at all. That's one thing. Then you have another gradient of people that, he's saying it, but it's not going to go too far. I'm not too worried. Then another group that, oh, he's saying it, but it's not going to apply directly to me. It's not going to be on my doorstep. And then you have other people that I don't know where they are, but they are completely detached from reality. They don't believe he's going to say it. They don't believe he's going to do it. Some of them are on both sides where some did not believe he would be elected at all. Other people believed that if he were elected, he wouldn't do what he's doing. But either way, they didn't believe, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of the non-literal folks, all of those various groups, I'm sure there are more I haven't thought of, but all those groups that didn't take him seriously and literally are the people now that are like, oh, let's watch him tear up the world and see what happens. And the ones that are being directly affected, in some ways, disgust me, Lisa. They just do, because it's like, I don't care until it applies to me. Like, I saw something on social media where it was, I think it happened to be Mrs. Reagan, where they had like this list of things that happened that she didn't care about until they happened to her and the president. So, I didn't believe in gun control until my husband, had an attempted assassination. I didn't believe in this. And that's where it's like, I still want to look up whatever country that is. I believe it was Finland. I still want to look up that information where there's a certain country that starts teaching the characteristics of empathy from elementary school up. We are a country that is not built on empathy at all. We're probably built on the opposite of that. And so given that, when you don't have empathy built into your DNA, then you look like a radical.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that is not new. I think the fact that this isn't, I'm not concerned about this because it doesn't affect me. oh, it's affecting me, now I'm concerned. That is not a Trump. That's not just a Trump issue. That is
Oh,
like that's
absolutely.
an American issue. I see that all the time
Yes,
with
yes.
violence against women. I see that all the time
Mm-hmm.
with racism or homophobia, right? Like it's just, I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
countless examples. And I think that is a product of kind of this individualistic nature, right? The same, like, I don't want to pay for universal healthcare, so Shaunna can go have surgery on my dime, right? That's her responsibility. She should pay
Mm-hmm.
for that. It's all that
Mm-hmm.
bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
yeah.
what you made me think of with that empathy, I'm going back through the filing cabinet in my brain here because I feel like I did listen to a podcast. I may have sent it to you, but essentially it was the way in which the right, so not necessarily the center right, but like further on the right, further like past libertarianism, kind of in the Trump area of the right of the political
Mm-hmm.
spectrum, that empathy is being diminished as problematic, that we have
Mm.
too much empathy, and empathy is bad, and empathy means we don't get things done, and we need to remove empathy from political decisions and policy decisions, and
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
it's even religious figures, I think, who are articulating this message. And I that is fascinating to me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think part of why the president is so nonchalant and, you know, quote unquote light in terms of all the chaos he is digging
Yeah,
up is that he doesn't have the capacity for empathy. Right. I also don't
absolutely.
think he
Yeah.
puts it, I don't think he put, I actually don't think he puts a whole lot of thought into anything that he does. He just ping pongs
Nothing.
around from one thing to the next to see
That's
what
right.
happens and what goes. And that means you're not then emotionally committed to those decisions. And then he has his like little group of minions around him who do the execution and the
Mm-hmm.
operationalizing, right? He doesn't even have to think about the
Mm-hmm.
details. He's like, you know, I want to put a teacup on Mount Everest, make it happen. Someone will go off and do that, right? And then he'll move on to the next
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I think that is in some place where the lightness comes from. And then his supporters are in that moment of lightness until it impacts them, to your point, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Well, and even with the empathy, lack of empathy connected with the lack of strategy, right? There is very little, if any, strategy at all because
Oh,
of that
right.
ping ponging. And so if you think even as flawed as our country's, government is and this whole American experiment that was created, it was still very strategic, right? When we think about, we have
Mm-hmm.
these, three seats of power and, thinking about how they should be a balance of power if it's used in the strategic way that it was created, right? Not perfect, but better than this. And so given that, if you don't have a capacity for empathy, if you don't have a capacity for strategic thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
usually that lack of strategic thinking never holds you accountable, then you have the freedom to ping pong about. You have the
Right.
freedom to not care what the ripple effect will be. You have the freedom to be completely detached from the reality of others because it doesn't directly affect you. And so, with that, I've just never seen a more apropos example uh, of narcissism in a way that is textbook,
Right.
textbook. And given that, I don't know how old he is, and I really don't care to know. I know he has a birthday near Juneteenth, which is just even more sickening. But what I do know is that he's getting up there, which means that he's spent his entire life not having to be strategic, not having to have an ounce of empathy, and not being held accountable for any of it.
Right.
So why
Right.
would anyone expect him to change? He is not going to change. His location needs to change. Folks
Right.
that voted against him voted for his location to not be in the White House. His
Yeah.
location is the only thing that's going to change. But other than that, he is not going to change. And so with that, again, we as the voting public and those that are still trying to function within all those circles of control that we talked about previously, circles of influence, we have to not let off the gas, because if we do, then we abandon the strategic thinking of our government as it was crafted and allow him to ping pong. Those that resist
Right.
say, no, we're not going to allow you to ping pong. There
Right.
has to be, you have to exist within the strategy of the United States government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not always going to get it right, but at least there's some form of check, balance, and structure that he's not accustomed to.
Oh, right. And that, yeah, that's basically non-existent right now. But that maybe is a discussion
Exactly.
for another day. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
drop the link to this Economist article in the show notes if you want to read more about the unbearable lightness of being Donald Trump. Then you can do so. And but let's go ahead and move into phase 2. Okay, so I feel like we have to talk about this. I think we might, it's come up probably, but I wanted to just do a phase on it, and it is immigration and deportations specifically. So there's just been, talk about chaos, right? There has just been a boatload of issues arising around immigration since Trump came into power, and I don't think he has feels much weight around the decisions he's making here when he is deporting people and ruining people's lives, right? So there's a couple of key ones, which Shaunna, I'm sure you are familiar with. So Mahmoud Khalil, who's the permanent resident, who was part of the protests at Columbia, and he was whisked away down to a detention center in Louisiana. And in mid-April, a judge down there said that the government had met the burden that he could be removed under this very old foreign relations or national security bill. Which, just an aside, Marco Rubio, like, I don't know how you sleep at night. What are you
Exactly.
doing anyway?
Exactly.
That is just an aside, but he's being persecuted for protected speech and a green card holder, right? And then also there has been a proliferation of students across the country having their visas revoked. So as of mid-April, there was 29 states have been affected with students at various institutions across all of those states having their visas revoked. Now, this hits home a little bit for me because in my early days of being in the United States, I was on a student visa. And I don't know that I was necessarily like super outspoken about controversial things, but I definitely was I was warming up. Like, it was really where I started to hit my stride, was in my kind of early days with the student visa. And I came in not long after 9/11. And so there was a lot of tension and a lot of fear in the international student community, particularly folks from the Middle East, identifying as Arab or Muslim or both, right? A lot of stress around that. We had the Patriot Act. And so I felt a little bit of that. Obviously, a white woman from the United Kingdom is in a different position, but I definitely felt some of it. But this feels a lot worse because even then, can't believe I'm saying that. Even then, in the aftermath of 9/11, there weren't plainclothes police pulling people at night off the street into an unmarked car and then shipping them off to a detention center in a state that is within the judicial circuit that is the most conservative. So it is absolutely a purposeful choice, right?
Right.
So I find this to be really challenging. And the other thing I wanted to say, Shaunna, with this first piece is I'm not sure if you've noticed this. I haven't seen much coverage about it, but what I can glean from the students I am aware of who have been deported, it's often in relation to their protesting, or even in some cases, not even really protesting, right? But related to Palestine and Israel, and they are supportive of Palestinian rights. And so a lot of the students that have had their visas revoked are students of color.
Oh, yes.
Right? Because there are white Europeans who were in those protests, Jewish students in those protests, many of whom may have been or still are international students. And to my knowledge, few of those folks have had their visas revoked and have been put under the threat of deportation. And yet what we're seeing is men and women primarily of color, primarily from the Middle East, Asia, Africa, who are the ones that are experiencing this, right? And I haven't seen a lot of coverage there. I don't have the data to back that up. I'm just kind of, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at news reports and the ways in which people are being shared that they've lost their visas. And the other
Yeah,
piece is that it's happening really quickly. It's like 1 minute you're legally here,
that's
and
right.
then 15 minutes later you're not, but you don't realize that because you're not getting notified, right? So you don't even know necessarily that your visa has been revoked until sometime after it has happened, at which point you're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
pack up your life and
Right,
self-deport.
right, right,
So I
right.
don't know what as someone who's worked in higher education, someone who
Mm-hmm.
is supportive of the First Amendment and freedom of assembly and being able to protest when you feel a government is not behaving in a way that it should. Like how is this landing on
Mm-hmm.
you? These student
Mm-hmm.
deportations, and
Mm-hmm.
the brazenness, kind of, I think, quite blatantly unconstitutional incarcerations and
Mm-hmm.
deportations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the first thing I think of, Lisa, is that, once again, I think we've gone over it before on this podcast specifically, is that one of the fundamental tenets of fascism is to silence dissent, dissent or voices that dissent. And so what better way to do that than to do that amongst the highly educated and those that are speaking out in resistance,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Whenever you're trying to change anything, even if you're trying to change something for the better, most times the one of the tactics in change management is to either silence or remove the resistors, even when
Right.
you're trying to do something great. And so given that,
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that it's not predictable, and at the same time I'm extremely concerned about, for example, the number of colleges and universities that are affected. Right now it's more than 80 public
Mm-hmm.
and private colleges and universities of all different sizes and types and shapes and so forth. Over 300, which, to your point, Lisa, all the time as our resident methodologist, I think is grossly underreported, but we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
300 reported at this point, with more and more coming every day. Of course, I'm thinking as an administrator, both in support of students, but also working on behalf of a university. I feel very strongly that that's underreported, partially because, again, you don't want to sow fear and chaos
Mm-hmm.
amongst your student body. And hello, it's past time to start making decisions as to where you want to go to
Right,
school in the
right.
fall for the new academic year. Do you think if I'm a bright student that's been accepted to your university that would be studying on a student visa, a la Lisa Ingerfield coming to the United States, do you really think that would now be attractive to me? Absolutely
Right.
not. And so given that, we have an enrollment issue there as an administrator. And so, with that, you know, schools like Columbia, just very large schools that don't have clarity, and they don't have clarity from moment to moment, Lisa. It's not like you get a dear colleague letter on Monday and then you enact it as an administrator. Things are changing
Right. Right.
daily as information is coming through and then being revoked once again, a la going back to
Yeah.
fear, panic, hysteria.
Mm-hmm.
Imagining, how hysterical parents and family members would be. I would be if my children were studying in another country, especially coming here from
Yeah.
elsewhere. And so, given that, you know, what they're unfortunately having to do, no matter how close they are to their academic finish line, they're having to drop out of school and go back home to possibly, again, and please forgive me if I'm misspeaking here, but most students come to the United States because they're coming to get something that they cannot get at home, academically, socially, what have you. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say I'm in this particular academic program. I come here to the United States specifically for that program. I'm close to the finish line. My visa is revoked and I have to go back home. I know that technology is real, but come on. Like
Right.
I can give you, I'm not going to, but I can give you the names of three of my mentees right now that are at the finish line, ready to defend their dissertations after 5, 7, 8, 9 years here in this country, pursuing their doctoral degree. And we have to figure things out for them because their visas have been revoked.
Oh, wow.
Some
Okay.
schools will allow, a
Mm-hmm.
virtual access, some will not, based on the fear that the United States is, pilfering around the world. There are some countries that won't even allow certain levels of access to the US because they have declared that it's not safe for their citizens to travel here or to even communicate with people here. And so it makes things very difficult, even from an administrator side of things, that's kind of caught in the middle of trying to get their students to the finish line, but also having
Mm-hmm.
to adhere to so many different stipulations. So yeah, but I did read, my former boss, who is an alumni of UMass Amherst, and they have always had a very strong social justice program and presence. They've been monitoring everything that's been going on with Department of Homeland Security to make sure that students are kind of aware of what's going on in real time. But the level at which they need to monitor, it's one thing if you're checking daily, it's another thing if you're checking on the hour.
Right, right.
That's kind of the level at which folks have to be vigilant. So it's sickening.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just there's often no reasons given. It seems very
None.
arbitrary. And so I want to but
Hmm.
I don't want to run out of time to say this. So I signed up for Substack, which I'm now regretting because it's just another area that I am like getting sucked into reading all of these
Yes, yes, yes,
journalists
yes.
and academics and watching videos about
Yes.
this, that, and the other, right? And then I went on
Yes.
there and I was like, this just feels like Facebook, but different. But anyway, there was a
Hmm.
journalist, a British journalist, who did a post yesterday or today, and she called it Introducing Insta-Fascism. And so she basically
Mm.
writes about the ways in which the deportations and the immigration quote unquote crackdown are being packaged purposefully to be pushed out on social media. So memes and short videos and the ways in which that they are broadcasting these extraordinarily cruel, draconian, fascist behaviors, but they are then like dressing it up. I mean, so one example would be Kristi Noem, who's the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, doing that little commercial where she's standing in front of the folks in the El Salvadorian prison for terrorists, and she's wearing a gold Rolex. I didn't notice that, but the journalist pointed it out. She's like, "Yep, that's pretty much a gold Rolex she has on her wrist right there," and she's standing in front of all these people who are incarcerated behind her, who may or may not be American or people who have been deported for,
Hmm.
right? And she's saying, if you don't come here, if you come here, you're going to get booted out. I mean, she uses stronger language than that. But anyway, that
Hmm.
little video, right,
Hmm.
was then put out in clips and, memes and stuff all over social media. And so the way that this journalist was kind of like making this connection was that the whole machine is leveraging social media to um, expand or export this message in a way or in a forum where they know lots of people are
That's
engaging,
right.
right? They're getting the
That's
news
right.
that way. So it's this quote, it's like insta fascism is what she called it. And I'll include the link
Hmm.
to her post. But part of this problem is that it kind of goes back to your first point in the phase around the lightness that Trump and his administration have
Hmm.
around these really serious things is if you are
Hmm.
creating a campaign that is so um devastating to so many people and then you're like packaging
Hmm.
it and pushing it out on social media, there
Hmm.
is a degree of unseriousness to that marketing, right? You may be speaking in a serious way, but the way that you're creating like a social media campaign feels unserious to me. And so I think it kind of pulls in the way
Mm.
that these decisions are being made. And to your point with your
Mm.
doctoral students, right? The devastating nature of being that close to the finish line and then being deported for no clear reason, and how, and obviously we've got the guy that was legally protected, Kilmar
Hmm.
Abrego Garcia, who was then shipped off to the El Salvadorian prison. And these are dramatic, painful issues. And I can't end this phase without saying it doesn't matter. It does not matter whether or not you are a member of a gang. You cannot be deported from the United States without a hearing. You cannot be told that you are a criminal if you have not been convicted of criminal behavior in a court, right? Like, so we get away from just cherry picking certain more sympathetic people that have been pulled, like the students or, the Mahmoud Khalil, whose wife is 9 months or 8 months pregnant at the time that he was taken, right? Like, and recognize that if they can pull people who are legally here, who are protected by the court or have a visa, and just ship them off in the dead of night without a court hearing, without the ability for them to argue their case, they can do it to US citizens, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's not hyperbole, right? Because if that is if a green card holder, if a person who has a court order allowing them to stay, they can just take away their due process rights, then what's stopping them from doing that with us, right?
Exactly. And so, and going back to your point around, gang member or not, what have you, again, this is the same freaking playbook, Lisa. It happens every single time, where it's much easier to paint a stereotype on someone that is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. How many times, countless Black men, for example, that have been victims of major crimes, Black and brown, I should say, but specifically Black men, who let's make sure that we depict them in such a way that they feed into a stereotype that may or may not be true. Or let's see if there were any drugs in their systems, when it doesn't matter if someone walked up and killed them in cold blood. That does not matter. And so they're trying to make the irrelevant relevant in such a way that those folks that have no empathy can have even less empathy. And they just let illegal stuff happen to legal people, where that background does not matter.
Well, and
true
even
or
if you're
not, doesn't matter.
Yeah. And even if you're undocumented, you still have due process rights. The Constitution guarantees that for you, right? You've got the 5th and the 14th Amendment. So like, you cannot incarcerate someone in a prison for terrorists in another country when they have not been convicted of a crime. Like, you should be doing that anyway, but they haven't even been convicted of a crime. Like, this is so self-evident that it's unconstitutional to me when, anyway. I could rant a lot more about this, but I think we're at time, so I will leave it there. But anyway.
Yeah, well, Lisa, here's the final kind of nail in the coffin of your rant, which I so appreciate, is that this is so unconstitutional. But remember, we have a lightweight, unserious president that does not care about your freaking Constitution.
Yep.
You don't care. Does not care that it exists, much less what it is and what it says. Does not care. Restoring order in the midst of chaos is reminding people, like Lisa just did, that we have a Constitution, and here are the actions and behaviors that fall outside of that Constitution.
Right.
Judges, courts, allies, restoring order, hopefully. Oh, goodness. So anyway, well, Lisa, unfortunately, even as I filtered the news this past week, watching folks sit on a plane because visas had been revoked and they couldn't go home, but they also couldn't come into the country, is obnoxious and sickening right now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to see more and more of those stories. But I appreciate where you're coming from, especially when it comes to the students, that, that's kind of our professional stomping grounds here. Yeah. So. All right. Well, that is another episode of the Unfazed Unedited podcast in its new form with 2 phases. Just to remind you all that you can reach us on all of your social media and podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com, or visit our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access both the new and the old shows. So please, if you like this week's episode, please continue to like us on social media, subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next week.
All right. See you next week.